Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 3 of the Level Up Symposium. My name is Andrew Scriver, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Digital Presentation Formats and Taking Your Show Online, presented by the Associated Designers of Canada with support from Toaster Labs Mixed Reality Performance Atelier. This event is sponsored by CITT Alberta. I'm one of the co-curators of the symposium and a member of the ADC, and I am very excited to be your host for this event. I'd like to first acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Tiohtià:ke, the unceded land of the settler city of Montreal, which, long before colonizers arrived, was a place of conference, conflict, and creativity for many Indigenous peoples, including the Kanien'kehá:ka, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and the Abenaki peoples. I'm honored and humbled to be able to be here to create and share with you all, and so I offer my thanks. So, in the spirit of gratitude, I would like to first acknowledge the support of the Canada Council for the Arts, who's our primary funder of the symposium as a whole. And again, as I said, our event sponsor is CITT Alberta. Thank you so very much. We'd also like to thank our other sponsors, IATSE, the University of British Columbia, Theatre Alberta, Concordia University, Ryerson University, York University, and of course, all of our individual donors. Thank you all very much. For your information, all symposium events will be recorded and presented in a freely available archive on our website within a few days of the event. Check back. Thank you for joining us today. So you're either watching this live stream on the Level Up website, levelup.designers.ca, on HowlRound at howlround.com, through our partners at Toaster Lab, or on the respective Facebook pages of the ADC or Toaster Lab. Regardless of your viewing platform, embedded on the same page as the video is a chat function in the top right-hand corner of your window. You can click on the little speech bubble. Questions can then be asked in the chat at any time, please, and will be read out to the presenters. So this event can be enjoyed through auditory or visual access, or a combination of both. I will read aloud all questions that we address from the chat, and this information will appear visually at the bottom of the stream. Visual access is also supported with captioning for all speakers. So captioning will appear directly below the active speaker, as you can see. If you require technical assistance to support your access, please email levelup@designers.ca for immediate support to provide feedback following the events. If you enjoy this session or any of the other Level Up sessions, please consider donating anything that you can to the Associated Designers of Canada to support our National Arts Service Organization in achieving its goals of advocacy, mentorship, and industry promotion. Donation links are available on all viewing platforms, which is our website, the ADC's website, or on canadahelps.org. So please consider donating. So thank you for your patience with all of our announcements. It's now my honor to welcome our guests to this event. So first up, we have Ian Garrett, who is a Toronto-based designer, producer, educator, and researcher in the field of sustainability in the arts and culture. He's a director of the Center of Sustainable Practice in the Arts, an associate professor of ecological design for performance at York University, and a producer for Toaster Lab, our partner. We're very, very happy to have you here. Welcome, Ian.
Hello.
Hello. Next up, we have Logan Raju Cracknell, who's a Toronto-based lighting designer and live stream artist who found that his pre-pandemic hobby of live streaming has transitioned into a useful skill. And not just useful, but necessary for the continued survival of our industry. So welcome, Logan. Very happy to have you. And next up, we have Frank Donato, who is a video designer currently residing in Kingston, Ontario. He's a frequent collaborator with live digital performance company Spider Web Show. And recently, Frank worked as a live stream technician for their Festival of Live Digital Arts, otherwise known as FOLDA. And he now leads the beta testing for their custom browser-based performance and rehearsal tool, Canadian Studio. Welcome, Frank.
Hello.
Hello. Frank and I went to school years ago. It's very happy, the first time we've seen each other in years. I'm really happy that you've managed to join us here.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Lastly, we have Emily Susanna, who is a award-winning video and production designer based out of Tiohtià:ke. They are a graduate of the National Theatre School of Canada's Scenography Program, University of Ottawa's Theatre Program, and they spent time as a projection technologist at the Banff Centre. They're a co-founder of Potato Cakes Digital, a production design and digital arts collective, and are also a digital dramaturg with Playwrights Workshop Montreal. Also one of the co-curators of the festival. Welcome, Emily.
Hi, nice to be on this side of the stream.
So here we are, digital presentation formats. That's the question that's been on everybody's mind, I'm sure, for the last year.
Almost.
How are we doing this?
Yeah. Well, that's
not-
one of the brilliant parts is that this is a very meta conversation. We're streaming our streaming. This is also one of the other channels. Hello, Miles.
Hello.
Sorry, Andrew, I jumped in there.
No, not at all. Please.
Yeah. Are we ready to talk about some online presentation formats?
I think that we are.
All
We're
right.
all here for this.
We're all here for this. So this is mainly meant to feel like a relatively casual conversation around the way that we're working now, so that we can start to talk about everybody who's on this call has been dealing with this sort of pivot. We were before the call talking about issues related to different types of hardware and different types of software that we're running into, and some of it may or may not have been planned, right? And so this is meant to be like, okay, here are a handful of people who are working on getting things online, who may or may not have been planning to do this literally 1 year ago today. None of us may have thought ourselves to be in this position, though we might have been involved in streaming in some way. And so this is to dispel the fears that people might have in getting involved with that. Everybody here, I think, has some experience with that, whether or not they intended it to be part of their theatrical practice or not, or have been somehow active in telepresence in some way. Anybody am I wrong there? Is there Emily? You were at this a year ago, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all of us here and video designers in general were primed, I think, for this sort of streaming revolution. There's a lot of skills that are sort of directly transferable. Do you have basic networking skills? Do you know how to set up a camera? Can you get your video from one place to another in a reasonably HD, reasonably high fidelity format? So when everything started to flip on its head, I know that I was excited about being able to explore all these new avenues. Mm-hmm. But also it meant that and I feel very privileged and very fortunate to say this, but there's been quite a lot of work for, I think, everyone in our sector of the field.
Right. What was your first sort of streaming experience? How did you get involved in streaming? I'm going to ask you first, just because we're already talking, but Frank, Logan, I want to know from you next. So that's warning.
So, I mean, I can't remember the first time I streamed anything ever, because I think that was probably some point 10 years ago when I was like, how do I do this? What's Twitch? But my first streaming experience in the pandemic was very early April. NTS released a series of micro grants for artists who wanted to do something. And so Andrew and I actually applied for one to projection map our living room wall. So if you see behind me, when we moved in, I was like, do you want to be cool hexagons? And I painted our wall to be covered in hexagons. So we applied for this grant to projection map all the hexagons on our wall and then do this live VJ set. So the pandemic had only shut us down by about a week and a half when we were like, oh wait, we could make art and send it out to everyone. And then I sort of deep dived into what's the best way to do this? And we were working with a composer who was in Toronto, and we're based in Montreal. So it was he wanted to play live to what we were doing, and then the visuals would react to his music. So it was how do we get high fidelity, low latency audio from Toronto to us into Touch Designer, back out to our streaming computer, then out to everyone. How does it look good? How does it sound good? And then also all the Touch Designer and all of that stuff, the actual art. But I think that was sort of my first streaming experience in 2020.
Right. Frank, what about you? You've been involved in CDN Studio for a while, right?
Yeah, I was very lucky to be the video designer for The Revolutions, which was the first public performance by Spiderweb show in Kingston, Ontario. And that was in 2017. Joel Adria, who works with Moment Factory, developed this wonderful program. It was called CDN Studio. It's now called Sketchspace, and it is a real-time collaboration tool on the internet. And at the time, we were kind of bound by a couple barriers that Google and the internet was just at in 2017. Like, we're so much further now. In the last year, we're so much further than we were in 2017. So we were dealing with latencies and times and getting signals across. And we were working with actors from coast to coast of the country. We were in Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, Kingston. We had digital actors, we had live actors, we had a live audience. So that was a massive challenge to, in as little latency as possible, connect all of these people around the country and present a live presentation to a live audience. So that was my first venture into live streaming. And it wasn't necessarily live streaming to the audience. It was live streaming actors into a show that was happening live to an audience. So I guess it was a little different that way.
Yeah.
But that was my first venture into the internet as a performance tool.
Cool. And Logan, I feel like sometimes I've strong-armed you into streaming on the theater side because I feel like you have a lot more experience, as we can sort of tell from your very high-end setup. That is the scenography of your streaming experience is much higher than ours is right now.
Yeah, so with my streaming experience, I started and still stream on Twitch. It started with just like video game streams with like okay webcam and stuff from whatever I had set up. And as over the year, I started it just before the pandemic hit, beginning of January. I was like, I want to do this thing. And then suddenly it started to become like, oh, theater, the main thing that I do for a living has now had to transition to a digital platform. How do I take those skills that I have and the tools that I have here to transition to that? So I think the first bit of, I'd say, like performance art that I started doing that wasn't my own stuff through live streaming was with a company in Poland called Festival. They do digital tours of Polish or Jewish areas of Poland. And it was helping them create this tour in a way that they could then they do it as a streamed presentation through Zoom. And it was lining up all these things, and a lot of the stuff I had just stumbled upon through Twitch kind of ended up helping that out in terms of things that I've learned, just like kind of like the what we needed to prioritize, like what does the audience right away grab is like this is off to them, and it's like how do we focus on that and then get the rest.
Yeah, that reminds me a little bit of, I mean, there's this sort of similarity between a bunch of different experiences, right? That I didn't think that I would be doing this with theater per se, but like my introduction to streaming had to do with like distance participation with things, because I have this like focus on ecology, and so there've been like years of like, how do you do a conference where someone can participate remotely, and we used to like hack together things with Google Hangouts, and they're like, oh, you can get 10 people into a chat room. How do we make it so that people can use that? And they involved like specific companies, and then working with HowlRound a bit to figure things out. That when the pandemic happened, like we thought we were being super ambitious with I was working on a project with the NAC for this project around the cycle on theater and climate change. And we were like, we're going to make it so that people don't have to fly to Ottawa to do it. They can go to these 8 different places to do it. But now we have to figure out the link ups between each of those spaces. So we spent like months doing that. And then like one of the last things I did in a theater was the tests that we did to try and get those link ups to work. And they're like, actually, you can't just do it in 8 places. You have to do it for everybody who is involved. And then as other things have come up, it's been a question of like, how do we translate those skills or those things that we've cultivated in other areas to be useful? And there's a lot of trial and error in it. One of the things that to set things up a little bit, Logan, you touched on this a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about our setups, or just to like introduce people to sort of where we're each coming from, because I think we're on of the 4 people here, where 2 of us are on one side and 2 of us on the other side of the Windows Mac divide or lack of divide. I think that it's the right tool for the job. We may be using different types of software. We may be using a lot of common software as well, and connectivity. So in the work that you've been doing, can you give like a brief rundown of like what your configuration is for how you're doing streaming work from where you are right now? I know that's where I'm doing it from. I'll go first. I'm on a cable connection with Tech Savvy that I had from before, and it is inadequate to some of my needs, because not Tech Savvy's fault necessarily. I don't know. But cable connections use like a shared bandwidth, and I've noticed with everybody working from home and everybody in virtual school that's gone down. I'm working on a Mac because that's what I had before, and I haven't spent the time building another computer or thinking about it since then. But that's what I had, and the work's got to get done. I'm most of the time showing people how to use OBS, and because that's what's free, but also dip into other things as well. Of the opinion that whatever you've got is the right thing to start with. Let's go back the other way around. Logan, what setup do you have? Because I feel like I'm going to start at the other end of the extreme.
Yeah, so
The RGB gives it away.
Yeah, so because my main streaming is through Twitch, and I am just like putting myself out there. I'm in my bedroom. It was, how do I make this kind of a fun space? So in terms of aesthetic things, I've just got some like fun, like really cheap. This is one of the things I think a lot of people think getting into this stuff is like, I need to spend a lot of money. Oh no. And I was like, I bought $20 garden LEDs. Would I use this for a show in a theater? Probably not. But in this case, they work great. They get the job done of making my grayish white walls look interesting. In terms of the components, what I found, the first thing I bought after the things that I owned was a better microphone. So I went right away to get an XLR mic with an audio interface, because I noticed the first thing that people notice once everything is up there is bad audio. Bad audio, just like for me, was instantly the thing that grabbed me. I was like, I want to fix this thing. In terms of my computer setup, I was just streaming. It's kind of in the back there now with stuff on it. It was just the PC I had at the time, but a next big upgrade was like over the pandemic, I built another computer because I was noticing with the newer, because my main thing is for personal stuff is streaming games, newer games running while sending the stream out was starting to clog that up. I gave up on the Macs at the beginning of this year after my MacBook died, mostly because when looking at the price, it was for what I could get for my budget, I could build something quite stronger. And then another for my setup is I went away from the webcam. So I have a mirrorless Canon camera that's attached through USB. I also do like photography of miniatures and stuff. So it's not something I would recommend people get unless you have another use for it.
Right.
$800 for a webcam is not a smart investment in gear. I would say like
Yeah, although all the high end ones, like the high end ones right now, are going like for part of the pandemic early on, we're already going for $800 because there's such high demand for them.
I would say the webcam that I was streaming from, I mean, I bought it from a friend. He sold it to me for $20. A new version of that before the pandemic was probably 80, and it's now 120.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I want to pull out a couple of things there just to highlight for those who are watching and are new to this and don't know that a couple of things that I'd like to point out when someone's talking about getting involved with streaming performance, especially from the performer side of things, like what is the best thing to get content into what you're working with, is all of the highlight all the things that you mentioned. Not that they have to spend a bunch of money on it, but that like if you're working off of somebody's laptop, that like that small camera and the bezel of the laptop and the microphone that's sort of embedded in the keyboard someplace, they're intended for someone to be sitting in front of your computer at best. So if they're not giving you great quality when you're in this configuration that we're in right now, for whatever level of HD audio, etc., that you have or don't have, that moving to anything external is a good first step if you want to up the quality. Starting with a mic, I second starting with a mic. Getting something that allows you to get a little bit of distance and a little bit of freedom of movement, or a little bit like is going to be positioned in such a way that's ideal for you not to be like sitting right up against everything as though you're just in a meeting, is going to are the initial first steps to just having a better like even video conference experience as opposed to over anything that's on board. So I think that those are really useful things to point out.
And I would say like for a performer, if you were wanting to take your like single person art that you were doing and put that onto a digital platform, like lighting is one of the things to look into, and that doesn't mean spend a lot. Maybe I'll just move my camera. I have like over here this LED panel. It does the job, came in a pack of 3, and again was like, I think total $50.
Yeah.
But it's like the difference, and I think this is the thing that intimidates a lot of people, is like, oh, you see really high-end things done for the like online, and you're like, oh, they've spent so much money on this setup. But you kind of get like the difference between, you know, an $800 camera and a $1,000 camera for this, and even like a $1,500 camera for what like I'm doing, doesn't really provide a bang for the buck. And like lighting's the same. Like companies like Elgato will sell well over $100 lights that can be programmed through your computer. Great, but this does the job and costs about 20 and is per like fixture and is, you know, all you need to start.
Right.
You'll get so much from that like initial just small investment.
Yeah. Frank, continuing on that, what I immediately start to think about is something that we're both contributing to, has been spending a lot of time on recently, in which there are many performers. What have both on your end of things, insofar as receiving from a lot of performers and then optimizing how the content that you're then pulling together into a streaming performance, sort of what's your setup?
Yeah, so I have a really interesting challenge and a different perspective from Logan, because I myself am not streaming. I'm more facilitating video streams from other people, pulling them all in, manipulating them, and then spitting them out. So, for example, I don't have a microphone. Nobody hears me, so I didn't buy myself one. I didn't really buy myself a webcam either. I just have my laptop one. I'm also a Mac. So I didn't really go heavy on the gear side of things, other than I just want to talk about I have multiple computers, because my computers, to take in feeds, manipulate them, and spit them out again, it's so much processing power required that I needed to split up the work between multiple computers. And the way that I'm passing signals between them is with the Blackmagic A10 Mini Pro, which I highly recommend as a little bit of gear. It's a little pricey. I think the cheapest model is about $400 or $500. But basically, this thing can receive video feeds from HDMI, and then it broadcasts. I'm actually not using it to broadcast. I'm just using it to basically shuffle feeds along, but it can broadcast directly with a bunch of effects and keying. It's a really great piece of gear that I've got. And then so here's another interesting challenge for when you're taking in other feeds is you can spend all your money on amazing cameras. And then at the end of the day, when it comes to me, I need to make it a certain size and resolution so that my system functions. So you can have the $1,000 camera and still not look like $1,000 quality just because I'm managing 6 video feeds at the same time in real time. Like there's 0 latency. I'm managing 6 feeds at a time, coming in, manipulating, spitting them out. And from me getting the feed till the feed hitting OBS, it's like we're talking less than half a second. And then once you hit OBS, then another 15, 30 seconds is introduced, and that's where your delays go. I was really interesting listening to you talk, Logan, because we come from very different perspectives of essentially doing more or less the same job. Just I'm not personally on screen. I'm just kind of facilitating people across. And so instead of hardware, I kind of devoted my time to software. And so right now I'm using a program called LiveLab by Culture Hub. Culture Hub is a New York City-based performance company, and they developed this tool that basically lets you take in multiple feeds and then spit them out to switchers. And then those switchers, so I can control who is in which switcher. And I'm basically screen capturing multiple switchers, sending them to a second computer where it's getting input into Isadora. I'm a huge Isadora fan. There are a couple different programs you could use to do this, but I'm using Isadora. Isadora is manipulating all of the video feeds and then spitting it out to OBS. So there's a lot going on in a very little time. I focused all my efforts on minimizing latency because I found that when you get into too much latency, like if you're over a second in latency, it becomes impossible to work. People can't talk to each other. They don't understand each other. You start to hear yourself or others. It gets really confusing. So what I've kind of devoted my timelines on was how can I get as many feeds as possible to me in real time, and how can they all see what I'm doing in real time? And so LiveLab I found was the best for my purposes of just taking the feeds and spitting them out. And Isadora is also being pretty fast and pretty great about taking those real-time feeds and spitting them out. And then so it's interesting, I call them the 2 timelines. They're kind of like the 2 time zones. And so you have the actor time zone, which is real time, as real time as you can get it, because they need to talk to each other. They need to see what's going on. If they're reacting to something that's happening on screen, they need to see it and be able to know where to put their hand or their face or whatever. And then the second timeline is the audience timeline. And that is usually 15 to 30 seconds in the past. So keeping those 2 timelines separate and true to themselves as much as possible, and that one's as real time as possible, and the other one's got to be 15 to 30 seconds just based on bandwidth and all the processing and yada yada. Yeah. But the 2 timelines, it's really important, I found, to keep those separate and to make sure that their heads don't explode when they're trying to monitor what's going on in the show. And because if you're trying to monitor what happened 15 seconds ago, like you're going to be lost immediately.
I'm laughing because on the current project in which you're doing this for, I'm also working on it, and I'm doing front end for it, so that like what is the audience experience. So I know exactly what you're talking about because I need both up at the same time. So I'm watching the live and then waiting for it to appear on another screen as it's embedded within a website to make sure those interactions are happening, so I can see like the interface questions come down the line so that I can do edits there. So the head exploding part is pretty much the story of my life.
Yeah,
Yeah,
It's a very similar thing for this symposium. In particular, when there's links that need to go out to the audience, I try to keep them in like audience timeline, but I still have to be engaged, obviously, with the streamers to make sure the stream is going well and answer any questions there. So sometimes I'll have like this is a little mental, but I run all my audio through an internal switcher, and I'll like put like one on one ear and one on the other ear, and it makes you feel like you're going insane. But then you're like, okay, that sentence has finally been said in audience time. Link can go in the chat, because otherwise, you know, like the people who are watching at home are like, wait, so they're going to talk about this? Like, I guess this is coming up? It's like you don't want to give spoilers or distract at the wrong time. Yeah. But the like cognitive dissonance of having your brain like split with lag, it's actually, I think, very similar to like when you're learning a new language and you're like translating in real time and you can like kind of understand it, but like you're always behind. I think it's a similar feeling.
Yes. Oh, I know it so well right now. I mean, just like technology aside, the human brain is an amazing thing that is amazing at filtering out information, because there'll be the 2 times and then the backstage like head comm chatter that's happening in this project over Discord, and then like there's the audio processing that's happening through clean feed, and they're not always, and then there's a Zoom meeting running at the same time, and it's like, where is somebody talking and when are they talking? And oftentimes there's been a couple of times where I've been like, there's a question, I need to say something to somebody, but I have no idea how to reach them, or whether or not they said the thing that I'm reacting to 30 seconds ago, or they just said it. What is your setup, Emily? How are you set up? You've been streaming for weeks now for this symposium in specific.
Yes, so it's funny because I'm actually kind of in between Logan and Frank, particularly right now, because we decided a little last minute that instead of being behind the camera or like behind the screen as I always am for these symposium events, that I'd in fact be in front of the camera. So we're not witnessing my full streaming setup in its regular glory. So usually, if I were streaming and people were going to see my face, I'd have like an HD wide-angle webcam and a green screen, and then a few panel lights. I think probably the same ones. If you got them on Amazon, I think they're probably the same little LED panel lights. They're great. They're cheap. They work. And then a USB mic that's separate from my webcam, and then a ring light, so that, because when you have a green screen, you really need to have like your actor light and then your green screen light. Otherwise, you start to run into like shadows and messiness, and you are the green screen and all that garbage. And then in terms of computer, this is where it sort of veers a bit more towards Frank, because my computer has been engineered to ingest a lot of feeds and be able to do things with them with great efficiency. So my streaming computer has a Blackmagic capture card built into it. It's like a PCIe. And then I also have a like Thunderbolt card, which you can do if your motherboard has a Thunderbolt header. So it can support per port 6 daisy-chained Thunderbolt devices. So depending on where you go for your capture cards, it can ingest like quite a few simultaneous live feeds. So if I'm working on a project in a theater, because our rules in Montreal, from our conversation, I've realized are a little bit different than in Ontario. So we can still stream live performances from physical theatrical spaces as long as there's no audience and we're all masked. Mm-hmm. So it's a computer that I would bring with me to a theater and then ingest all the feeds separately instead of ingesting them necessarily through like a splitter. Though I also am a big proponent of the A10 Mini. Both for streaming, but also for recording. Like the new Pro ISO version, which is a little bit more expensive, can record 4 simultaneous feeds, which can be incredibly useful if you're recording something where you have like a multi-camera setup. And it means that you can also monitor them on good monitors while you're filming, which I think is a step that as theater performers have moved to the recording and streaming world, the fact that like your eyes seeing reality is no longer the view you want to endorse. Like, you want to look at a screen. You're in a space, too bad, look at the screen. Don't look at the stage. I don't care what's on the stage. I care what's on the screen. So being able to monitor all those feeds, ideally on, like, if you can find them, color grading monitors, but any monitor is better than, like, seeing it in reality or, like, the tiny viewfinder on a camera.
Right. Right. How have you found, aside, like, can you extend the description of the setup that you have? Like, us in Ontario, we've had very minimal opportunity to do a lot of streaming from inside venues. They keep getting shut down and we keep getting moved around. So having that experience is valuable. I know that I've had the opportunity, like, I've done some live streaming stuff of performance theatrical work pre-pandemic, and to talk about that setup, but usually that like involves a bigger setup than maybe we do. What have been the setups that you've been seeing in streaming, that sort of in theater type of work?
Yeah, so I mean, like, ideally multi-camera. I don't think anything good comes out of like a single camera stream. It just feels like an archival, and no one wants to watch an archival. I feel like I've been saying this for a year now. But so ideally having 2 to 3 cameras with camera operators so that they can either move around or you can set those positions beforehand. And then running those all to something like an ATEM Mini, or the Ultra Studios are really great because they're like super lightweight. They're pretty cheap. I think it's like $150 per Ultra Studio, and like it has one job, which is ingest HDMI, and it does that job tremendously well. So a few cameras with some form of capture card, and then it depends then what's happening to it, right? Like, I've been working on a lot of shows where we've been filming and then like manipulating the footage in some way. So, you know, there's like layers being added or it's being augmented. So those would usually run through a separate computer because, as Frank mentioned, when you have a lot of feeds coming in, you just can't. It's like the concept of shooting in 4K, you know, like that's great. But are the people watching it going to have 4K monitors, and can your computer handle that many 4K feeds? And like, do you have any of the rest of the infrastructure beyond like the camera that says 4K? And then networked everything, like hardline, no Wi-Fi anywhere in sight. And then it's real. Frank's nodding. And then ideally, I would stream through an ATEM as well. You could stream directly out of a computer, but the ATEMs are great in the way that you can like put your RMTP feeds directly into like an XML file. And for those of you who don't know what those letters mean, it's basically when you're streaming to an address, you give wherever you're streaming from a code and a stream key, and it just tells the destination. So streaming through an ATEM is really, really painless, I would say. It's like the easy, low barrier of entry.
Yeah, it's nice to offboard as many processes as you can, because you're asking, and in all situations, like in my experience with a distance performers with like 6 performers coming in, we ended up using, you know, so different video platforms that people can use for it. Frank, you mentioned LiveLab. A lot of people are using Zoom. Zoom has its limitations into bringing into broadcast software because it doesn't output like video transfer standards. You have to sort of do a window capture with it. I've done a bunch of work now where we've been taking advantage of Skype and its ability to its integration of NDI, so that you can take discrete feeds, Skype, for no really good reason in my mind, is really resource intensive compared to like Zoom and other video conferencing platforms. But if you get the power for it, at least then you have the isolated feed that goes along with it. But then you're running whatever your video switcher software, your virtual video switcher. A lot of us have mentioned OBS, and whatever your video conferencing platform is, and you're streaming out. So you're taking in a lot, and even on this computer, which if people haven't picked up a lot of the streaming stuff, especially because it's related to gaming, I've found is optimized for a Windows environment because there's more users there that have been using it to stream games. So especially something like OBS and pieces of the streaming software. But once you start running all of those, and then you're like, and we'd like to monitor it in whatever video platform we're having, sending it back to that, you're just like, all right, I just need to pull out another computer, because like you're asking a lot of any machine to do that. Even once you start topping out, the fans start to yeah. Stream goes burr.
Stream goes burr.
Telling
We're topical.
Yeah.
I told my team yesterday that my computer is plugged into power, and at the end of the day is still around 55%.
Yeah,
like that's how hard it's working. Is it the charge isn't fast enough to keep it going?
Yeah. So like, yeah, if you can push any of those steps, like the encoding of your stream off onto a piece of hardware where like that's what it's been engineered to do, then I would recommend that. I'm just going to throw in one question that just came in because I was talking, which was like, what cameras have I been using?
Yes, I wanted to answer that one.
So I've had this is like more personal preference than anything else, but I've really liked Sony's line of mirrorless cameras, like the A4000 and A6000. They have like a good range of lenses that you can get. They're small, they're lightweight. They can shoot in 4K if that's your jam, though I wouldn't stream that way. I would just shoot that if that's the thing that you want. But then you have to edit 4K, which is like, we go back to computer go burr.
As someone who works a lot in 360 video, like, join me over in the 8K land. It's like...
Yeah, no thank you.
Yeah, it's a lot.
But yeah, I really like the Sony 6000, A6000 is a great little camera. They're like pretty small, pretty portable, great content.
Yeah, in this the pre-pandemic life, when we were a bunch of the stuff that I was working with would work with Panasonic cameras. We were working with like broadcast cameras, like it was for doing it. So it's like currently there's how many of the two models reversed, but Panasonic, that like they're AG and then some sequence of letters. The main difference between like they'll do up to 4K, but they've got we were going SDI, and so we could run it longer into some switcher. Like most of the switchers, you can get SDI so you're not running long HDMI, mainly so you don't kick it out really than anything else. Like HDI, the fact that HDMI is not a locking connector drives me crazy. But so you could go at SDI, and it could also the newer ones have NDI built into it. So then you can use anything that uses a network device interface to talk between things. But it's how a lot of things become interoperable when you're doing digital video transport locally. You don't have to, but it's a nice thing to have.
Yeah, that's a great feature.
Yes.
I will say as well though, for the Sony ones, is that they're like under $1,000.
That's a big difference. That's a big difference between the cameras. And the Canons are nice because they have the USB. Like a bunch of the Canon cameras have the USB webcam feature built into them. So it's like, whatever, all of these will get the job done, and it's like ease of setup. You're like how accustomed you are to the software. And Andrew says that they're more like $1,200.
Oh, well,
maybe they're under $1,000 US.
Yeah, the A4000 are a little bit cheaper than the 6000, but also I could be completely wrong on that. in terms of not being quite $1,000. I mean, like if you wanted to go fancier as well, like you could just go all in on Blackmagic. And then if you have like an ATEM, you can actually do all your camera control directly in the switcher software. You can manipulate all of those settings because they're made to talk to each other, but they are going to run like a hefty chunk more than getting something that's not Blackmagic.
Right. Well, let's talk about software for a second. The question came up, and it was actually rather pointed. It's like, why choose OBS over anything else?
I like this question.
Yeah. There's two versions of this answer. There's the complicated version, and there's the really uncomplicated version. Who wants to take the uncomplicated version? I bet we would all say the same thing. Go for it, Frank.
It's free and easy. That's my that's my reason.
Yes, it's open source. It has a good support community to it. There's lots of plugins to extend it. It's like I like doing things with NDI. NDI is not built into it. You get a plugin. It does stuff with NDI in and out for sending things as well. They've been developing it rapidly recently. So it's like the virtual camera used to be a plugin, and now it's just built into the last couple of builds, I think.
Which, for example, just to cut in for a sec,
no,
that's how we have our subtitles is OBS and the virtual camera, because it's open source and it's free, and it's a great way of connecting things. And like exactly what you're saying, Ian, there's like so many plugins that are just constantly being developed.
This is also one of the areas where like Windows has the advantage too, because the community that's developing it is the largest user base, larger than us doing streaming theatrical performance around gaming, tends to be PC oriented. There's things like there's a plugin that I want someone to port over into the Mac version of it that involves motion graphics, like being able to animate, just translation of graphics from one place to another in transitions. And you currently can't do that on Mac, but you can do it on PC. The Mac version of it can't access your system audio. You have to sort of do a hack around that. I use VB cable. I don't know, Frank, you use something else to get audio into OBS.
Yeah, the audio is coming in through a program called Audio Movers.
Okay, great.
And Audio Movers is basically, so our sound designer can send his DAW directly to me through a link in real time at extremely high quality. And then I'm able to plug that into Loopback, which is this awesome audio routing software. And Loopback then goes into OBS and pushes it forward into the stream. But Audio Movers, if you're looking to route sound in real time and high quality, I highly recommend looking into Audio Movers.
Yeah, and if you're stuck on because on PC you can just capture your system sound if you want, but if you need to do that on Mac, I use VB Audio does a couple of different virtual patch plugins where it creates a virtual input and a virtual output that you can match together to reroute your audio. It's not the slickest thing in the world, but it gets the job done.
I use that even though I'm on PC.
Yeah.
To have different sources at different levels and being able to individually send things to myself and to OBS. So I use a mix of VB cables and Voicemeeter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I use Voicemeeter Potato, which is the highest tier of Voicemeeter.
That's so cheap. Why not?
Yeah, it's like $5 to donate. It's donationware, which also I think relating to OBS, the spirit of being open, I really like when I find that in a program. But Voicemeeter Potato is great. I use it just to mix my daily life as well. I'll be I want this YouTube link a little bit lower, undergoing my Zoom call, and then there's fire just out of my left ear. So aside from professionally, it's just if you want a lot of control or any control over the audio on your computer, run everything through a virtual sound interface.
But I've been recently doing OBS workshops, and so it's like, as you mentioned, just to like explain what we're talking about when it's like why this is available. So each of us is capturing our camera or a video source via OBS, and then we've like capturing through a web captioner. We're capturing the like real time that has access to our mic, real time captions that we're then composing those things together in different ways. So it's like I'm just turning over. This is my this is the same OBS show that I have running right now. No, it's not actually the end. No, I don't want to put that up. I'm trying to find the right one that has like all these added into it. Nope.
While Ian is going through his OBS show, if anyone in the audience does want more information on how to do this, we have been sending out to people who email us at levelup.designers.ca. We have a little tutorial that we send to our presenters so that they can get set up. So if you as an audience member want to know how to do this, we are more than happy. If you send us an email, we'll send you our PDF, and then you can add captions into your feed. Yeah. But back to your fantastic OBS show, Ian.
Like I forgot that I put like end at the end of it when we were putting it together. It was like this whole visualization thing, which like it's not working right now because I moved a bunch of the content around. The other nice thing about OBS, I mean, it works for most programs too, is that you would you can move the shows around. Essentially, it's creating a JSON. It's creating a JavaScript file that's just like all the instructions. So as long as it knows where the stuff is, it will pull it in. You know, there are other programs. I've dabbled a bit in Livestream Studio just because for our work that we do at Toaster Lab, we have a premium Vimeo account, so we have it. And the nice thing about it, and really the main difference between it and OBS, is that it's got a bunch of transitions and stuff built into it. Like in OBS, you've got all your inputs, and it's up to you to figure out how to make stingers and graphics and lower thirds and all of those things. Like you can build all those things. So if you got that skill and you got that time, it's free, right? You can do all of that. The paid versions of it can be slightly slicker, just because maybe somebody spent a little bit more time paying somebody to do some design around the interface, but they've got like transitions built in. And stingers and some effects built in just to like sort of extend it. Also, the Livestream one, Livestream and Vimeo are the same company. So if you're using Livestream Studio and you just like log into your Vimeo account, you don't have to worry about like it will do. You can, same as you were saying, like if you're using all Blackmagic, then it talks to itself really well. If you're using Livestream Studio, it talks to Vimeo if that's what you're using as your platform really well. Though saying really well versus like I gotta get a stream key and put it into the field where I put the stream key is as difficult as it gets with an OBS. Insofar as they've got all the ingest servers like preloaded into there as well.
Yeah.
I do want to say one other thing about why to use OBS why I'm using OBS over the ATEM Mini, because originally I was going to stream out of the ATEM Mini.
Yeah.
And we realized that the ATEM Mini can't delay audio. And so we're receiving audio and trying to match it back up with the video. And I needed the control of delaying audio and video independently to match them. And I could only get, I don't know if it does any delay, but one of them was missing. And so I had to go back into OBS, and OBS does a really great job of efficiently delaying video and audio.
Right, so you couldn't retime it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way that we got around that is we actually, like, we output everything as HDMI just into an ATEM for that, like, last step of streaming. So all of our delays were, like, all calibrated already on our end.
I'm receiving the feed through loopback and audio movers.
Yeah.
I had no. If you're with your sound person, awesome. But if your sound person is in another city, can't use the ATEM.
Right. On the subject of getting things out, where are you sending things to? Where are you landing your feeds when you are sending things out? There's a lot of different options out there. I think Twitch has come up a couple of times because it's where a lot of, like, it's known for streaming. Where else are you sending things?
There's a question.
I mean, YouTube is like, I think the next most common one that I end up sending things to. or often doing something like Restream to go to like a lot of the conferences that I've worked on. It's been like, oh, this needs to go to 7 presenters' Facebook pages and 1 presenter's YouTube and someone else's Twitch. And it's like, okay, we'll just send it to Restream. They'll get it all. What I do like about YouTube is that like, here is a link to it afterwards. Whereas like Twitch will only save the video for until you're like partnered with them for a couple days.
Right.
You get like about a week if you're in like the middle tier for them, which, you know, a lot of, especially as like working with theater companies, like they're not going to spend the time doing a bunch of streams to get to that point. They're like, we have a show in a few weeks. We don't want people to see it until then. So yeah, I think like YouTube has been a really solid one. A lot of the theater shows, like the ones that I did with York University, the show that I just did with TPM, those were where it ended up going to.
Yeah, and they make it pretty easy. The big limitation is that you've got to request. Like if you're just going to get started, you know, it takes 24 hours to get the streaming capability turned on. Are there other ones that you're going to, Emily?
For this, we're mainly just going to Vimeo because that's where like HowlRound is, and then they're sort of distributing from there. But one of the questions, part of that question was about the ability to monetize. And what I would say around that is that it's probably easier to monetize the access to your stream, which is to say like sell tickets, and have the link up like privately, don't publicize it, like selling the access to get to your event, then leaves you a bit more open in terms of like, does the streaming service you're looking at actually have like all the other streaming capabilities that you want, and you're not paying necessarily a premium for services that allow you to monetize, because there's lots of ways that you can sell tickets online. We're using a platform called Tito, which is pretty cool in a way that it doesn't charge for tickets that are free, because a lot of platforms charge a fee even if you're doing like an event that's not for profit, right. Which ours is. But yeah, one of the cool things with StreamYard, actually, which is the format that we're talking to you today, is very similar to Restream. You can like broadcast to multiple different destinations simultaneously. So if we did want this to go out to like 5 YouTube pages and a Facebook and a Twitch, we could do that all within StreamYard versus having to send it to Restream. Yeah. But Restream also does have its own broadcast studio. There's like so many different places that you can go down that tunnel.
Yeah, the one service that has been recommended, I haven't spent much time with it, but the one service that someone pointed me to is like if you want to monetize the actual stream, aside from like the Twitch method of doing it, but another way that's good for doing it is dlive.tv. I don't know if anybody has any experience with it, but no. I just have it on the list of like, here's a streaming service that you could do to monetize the stream itself. But I think within theater, and I feel like you were just alluding to this, Emily, that like a lot of like the commercialization and monetization on the streaming side of things, we don't work at a scale at which that's particularly viable. It's not like we're going to get 1 million views on our stream. Like it takes a while, even if we're doing the most amazing shows ever, like that would still take like investment of time. You'd have to want to be like theater on Twitch to like really invest in cultivating that, as opposed to like, I need a place to put it out. We use Vimeo. The project Frank and I are using technically 3 Vimeo accounts, split between 3 different organizations, because we have 7 streams involved in a production running concurrently. And one of the so YouTube, I don't know if there's an upward limit on the number of streams you can do concurrently. I've not tried or looked into it very hard. I know with Vimeo /Livestream, they do like with their premium, which is their largest account that they publish a price for. Otherwise, you have to go over to Enterprise. They do 3. You can do unlimited streaming, but you can only run 3 at a time. But they'll do it immediately. You can white label it, so you take off all the branding and all of that goes along with their live events. But it costs money, like you're paying them to take it off. And they'll also redo the like, they'll link it. They have some of the Restream will do like every RTMP thing. And you can always customize it too, but Vimeo is willing to send it to wherever you want as well. The show that Frank and I are working on right now, which I guess I can say it. This is not really a plug, but it's kind of a plug.
You can plug it. That's fine.
We're working on a production of Orestes that's meant for streaming. It's not just a streaming performance, but it is like built within a streaming world. Like part of it is that we're the Toaster Lab side of it, the part that I'm involved in, Frank's doing all of the video, is we're building a custom web interface for it, so that you have to go through, like, you can't get to the videos without going through the website, and it's all password protected. So like the way that the ticketing's being run for that is that you then receive a link and you have access to it on just the day of the performance, and it's a custom platform. And then the next day you wouldn't be able to access it without having new credentials for each performance of it moving forward. I haven't seen too many other distribution platforms. Frank, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, so I send my streams to Ian and Garrett.
Yeah. I take all your streams.
And I just want to say, one of our very first conversations when we were dreaming up the world of Orestes was we didn't want to use a service like YouTube or Zoom or your average streaming service. So we decided we wanted our own website. And I think what I want to say is make your own websites. It's actually not that hard just to have a page playing a video. It can get super hard if you want to be more complicated than that. But if all you're doing is building a landing page with an embedded video, you can do it. It's not that hard. And you'll get a custom look out of it, a custom show, something that's different and that maybe people won't expect. I think that ultimately you're going to have to use something like a YouTube or a Vimeo or whatever to play that embedding. But if the question is what other ways can I get my shows across without being in a Zoom or a YouTube, build your own web page, embed your videos. It'll look so cool.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, sorry, Ian.
No, go.
I was going to say that's the route that we went with Level Up, is the links that people get when they sign up is to our website, and also then that's where our archives end up to try and keep things really clear and clean, because we're not charging and we do want this to be publicly available for a significant period of time. So keeping everything in one place was where we wanted to go. And it is still streaming to HowlRound and on Facebook, and I can look at the analytics for those, but they generally on most of our streams are about 80 to 85% of people are accessing it through the website. So we're still getting some incidental viewers who might be on Facebook and see something, but those engagements aren't as long as on the website. Mm-hmm. And it creates a more polished experience, I would say. If you're really technically inclined, you can actually build your own RMTP server using the Google Cloud server systems or AWS, depending on what you're more familiar with. But it's not a trip for the foolhardy down.
Yeah. We there's 3 people who are sort of that make up the core of Toaster Lab, and Andrew Simpri, who is in Toaster Lab, as opposed to Andrew Trevor, who's introduced us earlier today. Multiple Andrews, lots of people named Andrew out there in the world. I don't know if you know this, but anyway, he does a lot of the technical. And one of his projects in pandemic was running a pirate radio station, but a pirate stream. and so he didn't want to send it out to. I hope that this doesn't send anybody after him. But like, to get around like licensing issues and not worry about it and just do it. Like he's like, no one's ever gonna like. I don't know who's gonna see it. I just want to send a link to friends, but I want to play whatever I want and not get into any sort of things. He's like, he is definitely on the high. He is a high end developer. He's like, really, the RTMP, like to rebuild Twitch without all the Twitch around it is like 60 lines of code. It's not actually a lot of code to do that. He's like, the hard part is managing all the data that comes across, like to be able to transport the data, because you need that high speed connection to do things, and then that data has to go someplace for someone else to access it, and so you have to have up and down like space to be able to put it in. But yeah, you could build your own custom RTMP solution. It's not that hard. It could get pricey though.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, it was something I looked into briefly for this symposium, and I was like, Emily, you're focusing your attention in the wrong place. Like, we need to finish getting guests. You don't need to be building a custom server just because you think it'd be fun.
Right.
Because
I like
you
your
also
idea of fun.
you also will definitely like run into like, is this worth it financially once you're figuring out the amount of data? Like, there's a reason that you pay for other streaming services, you know, like they have servers that they need to pay for, and if you do it, you will also have servers that you need to pay for. But if you think it's fun, like I do, then give it a shot and put it on your own website.
I'd say that about the website side of things. Like we've been developing this website for the show to get like custom ways of like the audience going through things, and there's like a branching narrative. We want to do the wrap around it. I wouldn't say it's particularly like it's like nice that it contains the show. The focus is very much on the show content, and some added features to it. And it's like, there are things that you can go through and you can click on. So like we put the time into like, where can we create clickable areas so something comes into the video? Now you know that you can click on something and then it takes you to different parts. So it's got some like small digital immersion types of engagements for it. But it's really not that like getting started with doing that, like, because that's also part of the scenography, right? This is a design conversation. Like there is the video itself and there's designing that, but then there's also like, it's like if you like didn't think about what the theater looked like when you walked into it. There's, I'm going to leave all the lights on, and it's actually a McDonald's play place. But I'm still going to do. I'm going to have. It's going to be under a freeway over. I mean, unless that. But like you'd put it there because you'd wanted to. But like, I'm going to do a production of Death of a Salesman, and I'm going to put it in the McDonald's play place. Unless that's your concept.
I'm like I've watched that show.
I know. I'm like, I can't think of an example that someone would want to see at some level, but you want to think about what the surrounding area and what the surrounding user experience is of it as well, because we do that anytime anyway. So the downside to YouTube is that you then get surrounded by the YouTube junk, and Twitch, looks like the Twitch thing, unless you invest some time in doing it. And like, it's so easy to just go and embed it someplace else. And like, even if it's a blank page, so get rid of all the distractions and the ads and everything like that. Yeah, you're going to go to, I know where you're going to go and I want you to go there. Do it.
So I was going to say, speaking of engagement, this great question came in, which is one challenge I find when creating live digital content is the lack of engagement. Have you found any tools or strategies beyond a live chat, so no one can take that one, to engage your digital audiences?
Can I say that we put performers in the live chat? Like we put people into the chat? Yeah, that's one thing that we've been doing. We've yet to have the performer on Orestes. They've yet to do it, but it's there. The functionality is built into it. So it's almost
and that's... Sorry, go ahead, Logan.
I was going to say the York shows, the performers, at least from Hags, would go into the chat when points that they weren't on video. And...
Way to dodge those spoilers.
yeah, it's like when they weren't in a scene, they'd go in and engage with it, which I think creates a whole new dynamic that you can't have with, or cannot easily have with traditional theater. But in terms of non live chat ways of getting engagement. It's tough. The big things are like that I find are make interesting content somewhere else that makes people hyped about your show. Like talking from a Twitch perspective, live streaming, you're not going to get engagement just from live streaming something. So like at least theaters have their pre-existing subscribers and people that are interested in that. But if you're trying to get new people, you know, I know again going back to York, there would always be like Instagram stories. Like Instagram is great. A minute video on Instagram, it's like longevity in terms of engagement with an audience is about 90 minutes. Twitter has an engagement of about like when you post something 5 to 15 minutes after that, unless you have something blow up. Facebook and YouTube, of course, much like longer lasting things, but it's that look at social media is the big one. And like, you know, maybe this is just me as someone who like spends a lot of time on social media. I find most theater social media really boring. Like looking at big theater companies, it's like, I'm engaged with you because I am a theater person who is already part of this community. But, you know, I think if you're going to, especially entering a digital platform and a world that already has people involved with it, like there are people who consume digital content, you know, reach out to those people. And that is like post 3 Instagram posts a week, post 4 Twitter posts a week, have, you know, people who feel comfortable, maybe performers or designers, share bits, either like funny things or whatever level of like, you know, pre-work thing that you feel comfortable sharing. Because I get you want to hide as much, but it's yeah, that big engagement comes from social media in this setting. And yeah, my big ones are Instagram, Twitter.
Can I toss in there too?
Sure.
Or just to add to that, is all of those things. Like if you start thinking about, there's I don't want to dig it up, but there's like a slide when I've been talking about people doing workshops around. It's primarily like technical around like getting used to OBS and setting that up and things like that. But there tend to be designers, and so that there's like thinking about all those engagement channels as part of the show. Like this is no longer like the show isn't just what you're seeing on screen. It's like going back to that idea, what you said earlier, Emily, is that like the single camera is an archival shot. Like we're seeing one view here. And if we think about now, the site isn't just our screen. And then you can have the chat engagement. Starting to think about like what's the extended site of it's like it's an online show, it's an online theatrical presentation. That there are ways of engaging, extending the idea of what you have, so that you're engaging people and in as many channels as you can, and trying to build that in. Now that's not easy to do, especially in the frameworks that we have. And there's like whether or not you get to the true thing. A friend and collaborator, Jacob Needs Vicky, like I like his turn of phrase that it's like we've lost the ability in the last year for the audience to ruin the show, like that aspect of the social contract. So I like that's one of the areas that I'm super interested in. One of the things that we were exploring with the Orestes website that I don't think anybody bought into but me was the having like. You can use WebRTC, web real-time chat, and implement that. And it works for chat, but it's like how Discord does its voice transmission too. You can build it into the website. We're using it right now. Like it's part of the back end here. That if you built it into a show so that you could like ask the audience to turn their mics on so that you could hear them react in real time. It's tricky because they'd be reacting to the stream. This gets back to the 2 time zones. It's a little brain breaky to do it, but like, so you could start to interact with people, or if you break things out into Zoom or different interactive elements. There's a show that students at York are developing right now that has a lot of gaming elements to it, and you like interact with it through Zoom, but then it like will send you to like a website where you play games together, and that's how you progress the show. Is that like it? you can do the stream, but then you have other places that people go to interact with you, so they feel like they're part of what's moving forward. So it's not, you can't, all of those get down to, you can't just rely upon the video for the engagement, and that hopefully people will talk about it. You have to go and engage them in some way.
Yeah, and it's also about, I think that this for any design element, but it comes back to like the dramaturgy of it, right? Like it's figuring out how you want to engage with people, why you want to engage with people, and at what points with what methods. So, like even if you're going to be like throwing people into like a game or asking people to turn on their mics or like whatever all of these options are, because there are a lot of like interesting ways to like grab the people through their computers. You need to still be thinking about like, why are we doing this, and how does that integrate to the story, and how does that make sense dramaturgically?
Mm-hmm.
I was very fortunate to see a piece or experience a piece in the early pandemic that was done by Michelle Cutler, and I don't remember the rest of her team, but it was primarily audio based, but also had some like text elements. And so the audience was super limited. And then there'd be points in this story where you would be like asked to type things back. And then those would get integrated into the rest of the narrative. And you'd see everyone's responses. And, there was a little bit about like calmness versus anxiety, and like those sort of tensions is like, I would say like quintessentially early pandemic art, in like the best way possible, like how to make you feel calm at home. And so like one of the questions was like, describe like a place that's comforting. And so people would just be like typing all these responses, and then they would sort of come in layered, but the speed that they would come in was like very slow at first and then would build up. So it really did feel like you were like being enveloped by like all this like warmth and comfort from these people that you didn't know, you couldn't see them, you didn't know their names. But it was very engaging, but made sense in terms of like where in the story it was inserted, how it was inserted, how it related to like the rest of the piece. So it's really important to keep that dramaturgy in mind when approaching this concept of engagement.
I just want to say I think it's a really awesome question, because it really gets to the core of live digital performance. And I think that engagement is participation, and participation reinforces that this is happening live. And if there's no engagement or participation, how are you proving to people that what you are doing live is live? And if there's no proof that it's live, why are you doing it live? You will save yourself so many headaches and so many sleepless nights if you don't do it live. So you need to have a reason to be doing it live. And that goes into what Emily was saying of the dramaturgy of the piece. But I have spent the greater part of the last year using this question of engagement of online audiences.
Yeah.
Because I think it's so important to live digital creation. And if you're going to be live, have a reason to be live. And because there are only two ways to prove that you're live, at least that I've found. There may be more, but there's two ways that I've found, and that's participation or failure. Those are the only ways to prove that you're live.
No, it's 100% correct. When in June we did a dance performance, and it was like 6 performers. This was the one with NEI. 6 performers. They're like in 3 different countries. Somebody was coming in from New Zealand. Everybody was in a different city. Everybody got a green screen. We figured out optimist thing, composed all these things together, put it up online. Every single time we rehearsed it, something went wrong. Somebody's connection dropped out. Somebody's resolution dropped. Like something happened with it going forward. The first time it all ran, let's go with flawlessly. I'm going to put that in scare quotes, but the flawlessly, like as intended and designed, was we only did 1 public performance of it, and at the end of it, I was just sort of like, oh, why didn't we just record that? Because like it was just too slick. It was too slick for what was going on. There was one point at which we had integrated and we just ran out of time to implement it, but we were going to put a Facebook chat group that we had curated and use an OBS window capture to like have it superimposed so that people could like share in parts of the show. And it was designed in such a way that like the content, it didn't really matter if it was synchronous. Like we cut it out before it would like, so it'd still be relevant in the feed for when people were participating. And we were doing it as a Facebook chat because you could create a group and then you could control who was in it so that it wasn't just like a bunch of random people sending things or a hashtag or something like that. And we ended up cutting it just because nobody had the energy to wrangle the group together. But I was like, I really missed it when we got to the end. I was like, oh, that ran really well. Really didn't matter that we did it live.
Yeah. I mean, it's like interactivity in any form, right? Like when things get pitched in a traditional theatrical setup and you're like, oh, can make it interactive, and you're like, okay, well, we could like spend hours programming this in Touch Designer and put these sensors strapped to the actor and check it for 15 hours and it's going to be great. But will anyone notice if a stage manager just hits a button at the right time and it happens, right?
Yeah.
So like sometimes that interactivity is like needed and impactful and like truly does need to be interactive. And sometimes it just needs to feel interactive.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So like I think the same thing applies here. Does it actually need to be live, or could you record and edit a really like slick version of your show and release it? Right? Like what are those tensions there? What are you looking for in terms of your output? Because if you don't actually need to or want to engage with your audience in a live way, like what Frank was saying, you're going to get 1,000% better product in terms of reliability and control if you do it beforehand.
Yeah. Two things that I would encourage people to do to enhance that. I think that it's been we've danced around it. Like, make sure you have the capacity to do those things too. Like, if you like have a person to do those things, you can't have a video designer / streaming. That's already 2 jobs, if not more. And then also have that same person be like, no, I'm going to design all these interaction points for it. You need someone to be thinking through that. It's a slightly different skill set to talk about what is a linear progression of a set of cues versus what is user interface and what is interactive and what happens, what confirms, like what does the user experience. I'll use a case study that we haven't solved, but it came up in notes last night. Is that there's a point in the show, Frank knows what I'm talking about. There's a point in the show where you can like select a couple of different things, and one of them is to stay where you are. But if you can, and so there's different things that you can click on. And I'm trying to talk about like, well, what happens if you click stay? We're like, well, if you stay, it's like, but then nothing happens. So do you know that anything happened? And if you don't know that something happened and you try and click it again, you're going to end up stopping the video because you've now clicked the stay thing and you've gone to a different place and you don't know it. So it's like, what happens to acknowledge those things? And so you sort of need, just as why we bring in different areas of expertise. There's new levels here. It's like your streaming person could be a completely different thing. There's design and technical elements of that too. Wherever you're landing that feed and someone's going to be observing it, designing that experience and having them work together as a team where it's like, who's creating the buttons? Who's creating the graphics? Are they in the video? Are they over the video? Is it the surrounding experience? Are things like bring people in to do that have the expertise, or at least the bandwidth, both literally and figuratively. That's why I dropped out for a second there, because my internet connection has been questionable. I've been tethering to my phone, and I just hit my data cap for it renews tomorrow. I made it to the end of the month.
See, we're live. This isn't fake.
I dropped out because I had to turn it to a phone to make this session work today. Well, I'm figuring
we had
out
interaction and we had failure. Both of the keys to being live.
But I'll put this question out to the audience, the at-home audience, is that we've been trying really. We're getting the questions in. Is like, does this feel interactive? I'm sure we'll see later when we see a transcript of it, what's happening out. But I would be curious to the audience here, like, do you feel like you have that you're engaged with us, because we are acknowledging, integrating, asking the specific questions, or getting integrated into the graphics. Like this is also why Emily, I was like, you should be part of this, because there's this meta conversation of we are doing a live performing of talking about performance. Does it feel engaging? How are you engaging? Do you like this experience? This is the same type of experience that we're talking about, perhaps with fewer computers involved, because we're just us talking. It's a simpler setup.
It is. Speaking of engagement, there's a few questions, just be
Oh, yeah.
cognizant of time, that we haven't gone to. So I'm going to throw up, do you have any setups to help with eye lines when you are talking to someone through a lens and may not be able to also see their reactions?
Little LED above the camera.
Like a tally light sort of thing?
Yeah, just something really small that won't get on them, but that, especially if you're doing it in, let's say, a theater where they're dark, but like something where they can see, this is where I need to look.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
that's often what's there. If you're, that's why they position you where you are in Zoom. They always put you towards the top center in the grid view, so because we're vain and we look at ourselves, that it's to pull your eyes up to the camera so that it looks like you're looking at the person you're talking to.
I was going to say, sometimes... Go, Frank.
What are your... You need an external webcam and an external monitor, and you need to play with those two things. Because when you have the ability to move those two objects of what you're looking at and what's looking at you, you can find that balance and sweet spot of looking at a camera, and just behind there's the person you're talking to or whatever you need.
Yeah. Emily, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say kind of similar, but less impressive sounding. Sticky notes, when you figure out where your eye line works, or like if you have to point to something, like when Erin talks about the chat when she's doing introductions, she always like points up to the place, and she actually has like a chat bubble sticky note directly where she needs to point. So it's taking the time beforehand to like work with your webcam, work with your monitors, and then like give yourself help. Like if I'm doing a let's say like an introduction, I'll make that text window like the amount of width that my eyes can comfortably scan while still looking at the camera, and like all the way up as close to where my camera is as possible, so that when I'm reading it, I like am suitably engaged. So it's like taking that time beforehand to work out those kinks.
One of similarly, like if you've got like, so I'll show a couple of things. I've got a couple of visuals. So I've got like this guy. This is a small tripod foot selfie, looks like a weapon most of the time, but and phone holder. But that if you like right now, like right about there is where everybody is. In some cases, like if you're going to use a camera that can be in front of your monitor, just like literally put the camera at eye line with the person that you're performing against. Like take it off of it. Like this is one of the reasons. This is what you're saying in terms of external cameras. Like put it in the place where it needs to be, so that is at the right place for somebody else's eye. Because even if like right now I can be looking at my webcams at the top of my camera, like it's still getting me in a slightly up position because it's like I'm looking at someone who's slightly taller than me because my monitor is set here. So if I was performing, not that I am not a performer, but if I were like engaged and like talking directly to somebody, I would actually put this in front of me right here. I can see through and see the person talking well enough, better there, and engage with them more directly, one-to-one with the screen in the middle, without having to force my head up away from them. Than there. So those are like easy hacks. I saw someone made one out of Lego where they like, just like took their webcam and like dropped it into the middle of their string to like cantilever it over.
That's great.
And having external monitors to look at it too. We've been doing a puppet piece. Let's see if it's worth sharing this. We've been doing a puppet piece where the performer and a puppet, I guess two performers and the director, are in two different locations, And so because this is someone who has done work in Muppeteering, not just puppeteering, Sebastiano here, he's already set up with, like, they only ever perform, like, the secret trick about the Muppets, they're only ever performing they're watching a monitor and doing everything in reverse, and so that they know what the eye line looks like. So we set up monitors so that you can pull the eye line to the right place and you can see where you land when you combine yourself with somebody else, is helpful to also checking things.
So we have like 1 minute left before I bring Andrew back in, because I'm still managing this stream.
How's it going?
It's going great. And so I'm just going to throw in this one because I think it's going to be kind of quick. Are there any recommendations for entry-level mics for better audio recording quality which won't break the bank?
Any.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, anything is better than your like laptop's built-in mic. I'd say entry-level Blue Snowball is cheap. I've had the Yeti and I've used the Snowball, and I honestly could barely tell the difference. That I don't think, as much as I love my Yeti, it's worth that extra money. Get a Blue Snowball. It's under $100. Plugs in by USB, and for things that you don't need an extensive audio setup, I think it will fulfill most of your needs.
Yeah, Audio-Technica also makes a nice one. It looks like an SM58, but it has both USB and XLR on the back. So you can use it as a USB mic, but then if your setup gets fancier at some point and you want an external audio interface, or you're like bringing it to a traditional theater, you can just like stick an XLR in the back and it'll also work. And it's under 100 as well, or maybe I'm clearly bad at prices, so it's probably like a little bit more than $100.
Yeah, I've got the ones on the webcams are not any good. Even if the webcam is pretty good, the mics on the webcams are usually, I find, are tinier and not as good as the mics even on the laptop. Depends on the laptop, I suppose. I've got a Blue Yeti on a broadcast arm over here. I don't have it because it just lands in front of my face, so I didn't get it set up in time. But I've got it hanging out over my arm for some things. I know some people are not like, and that's like, let's say 150, like, for, because there's the two versions of it, so that's like 150 for it. I would say the thing that I've noticed about the Blue Yeti is that, like, it comes with like a table stand, and like you touch the table and it hears it. Like, it is so sensitive, you have to get hands off. So it's nice to put it on a broadcast arm. If you can get some suspension like what Logan has, like, these are the ways that you start to upgrade it. For my day-to-day stuff and what I'm talking to you on now, which usually sounds pretty good, I originally got it because I'd bring like in remote guests when I was teaching, and I could connect my laptop, but the audio was always a problem there. It's effectively the same issue that I got like a desktop conferencing mic, which I could show you, but then you couldn't hear me because I'd have to unplug it. It's what my primary one is. So it's a basic, it just shows up as a USB mic, but it's meant for like if you were in a conference room to get a bunch of people around it. And it just sounds a lot better than either one of the tiny mics. It's a bigger condenser. It's better at like ranging a bit, because especially when you get away from the things, the mics just open up like crazy. But even like most headphone jacks on your laptop now, if you don't have a discrete mic, they have the 3 rings on it. It's a TRRS, 2 R's, 2 S's. I can't remember now. I never remember which letter to add. But they, if you've got like the headset, one better anyway. But then like you can get like a wired lav even and clip it onto you. And you're going to get better because it's going to be right up against you. Rode makes a nice one, RODE, or RO with a thing through it, DE. Makes a nice like wired lav that you can just put into most headphone jacks on, because they'll have the ring for that. Or you can even get a very simple USB to 3.5 millimeter. And just getting it closer to you with a decent quality condenser, doesn't have to be wireless, doesn't have to be USB, doesn't have to be fancy. You can still stay well under $100 and get much better audio than anything that's built into whatever your other visual recording device is.
Hi, I'm back.
Oh, hello.
Welcome back.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, so thank you, folks. This is great. Great conversations. Got a lot of questions, and I think we've answered them all, and there's probably still more questions. So if anybody in the audience wants to ask questions, you can always bug Ian, connect with Toaster Lab, and just keep asking him questions. I'm sure he'll really love that. Thank you again for all coming out and for sharing your thoughts and what you've been doing and your tech. And thank you. It's been great.